Hi, everyone. I'm Autumn.
And I'm Emily.
I'm the managing editor of the Jimson Weed, and she's the assistant managing editor, and we'll be your host for coffee night tonight. First, we want to thank everybody for coming to coffee night. We especially express our welcome to our featured writer, Suzanne U. Rhodes. We're very honored to have her with us for the 5th time tonight. Let's give her a round of applause. Hi, everyone. I'm Autumn.
And I'm Emily.
I'm the managing editor of the Jimson Weed, and we'll be your host for coffee night tonight. First, we want to thank everybody for coming. Oh no, I have a clone.
Hello. Am I to go ahead and begin now?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Sorry.
Okay. Dr. John Cole, chair of the Department of Language and Literature, is not able to be here in person tonight. He, however, would like to convey his welcomes to all and to our featured poet, Suzanne U. Rhodes, through a video. He will also express his congratulations to Professor Michael O'Donnell, known to everyone as OD, on his retirement after 54 years of service to the college.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Cull, chair of the Language and Literature Department here at UVA Wise. I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you on this occasion, the 40th edition of Poetry Night. And I want to thank Jillian Wang Tiller and Ken Tiller for all their hard work in organizing this extraordinary event. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our guest featured writer tonight, Suzanne Rhodes. I think all of you know that our colleague and friend, Michael O'Donnell, is going to be giving a reading tonight from his forthcoming book on Papa Joe Smitty, which I'm looking forward to reading. Michael has been at UVA Wise now for 54 years. When I think of OD, I think of the words friendship, loyalty, and generosity. I truly do not think that I've ever met a person who is kinder and more upbeat in my whole life. I have the distinct pleasure tonight of presenting to Michael, as a small token of appreciation for all of his years of service, this plaque from his colleagues and friends at the Department of Language and Literature. Michael is retiring from active teaching, at least on a full-time basis, but I'm confident that he's going to continue to make many years of valuable contributions to the Department of Language and Literature and the college ahead. So my hearty congratulations to Michael for all that he has done for us. I value his friendship deeply, and I look forward to all of the time that we're going to spend together in the future. Thank you.
Dr. Tiller will now present the physical plaque to OD.
I think Dr. Cole speaks for all of us. I think Dr. Cole speaks for all of us who have had the honor and pleasure of getting to know Professor Michael O'Donnell, or OD, over these years, whether it's as whether you've known him as one of his as a student, or as a fellow member of the community, or perhaps as a fellow Notre Dame football enthusiast, or in my case, and in Dr. Wong Tiller's case, a very dear friend and colleague for 24 of the 54 years that he's been with us here at UVA Wise. And I think knowing him as we do, we know that he's has been and will remain very much a part of the tradition and the history and the spirit of the college. We're celebrating his retirement, but we know that we're going to be hearing much more of him. So Professor O'Donnell, OD, here's to the next chapter, and congratulations on half a century and more of service to the college and its principal.
A thank you to Dr. Cole, Dr. Tiller, and Professor O'D. We also thank Provost Tricia Foltz-Bennett for funding and supporting for the spring event. In particular, we want to thank all of our donors that have contributed to additional funding to this creative journal. We thank the support of College Foundation, especially Valerie Lawson, Vice Chancellor of Advancement and Alumni Engagement.
As a member of the editorial staff, I'd like to take this moment to thank our managing editor, Autumn Stover Bailey, and the rest of the editorial staff, Emily Mullins, Rachel Ward, Trevor Mead, Eli Dingus, Jessica Wells, and Lauren McCoy for this issue. We also want to thank our faculty advisors, Dr. Wong Tiller, Dr. Crimmins, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Dotson for proofreading and/or feedback. Last but not least, we want to thank Millie Lusk for typesetting and universal printing, making the final production of the Jimson Weed possible. The purpose of Coffee Night is to promote writers and artists of the community, as well as contributors to the Jimson Weed. We're glad that Coffee Night offers a forum for area writers and performers. Now, I'll introduce Autumn Stover Bailey, our managing editor, for her last issue before graduation in May, to say a few words about the Jimson Weed.
Thank you, Emily, and for your and everybody's hard work on this journal as well. Good evening. As managing editor of the Jimson Weed Literary Journal, I am extremely proud of what we have accomplished during COVID, and very pleased with the interest and support that made this spring edition possible. We regret that we could not publish everything and have postponed several submissions to the next edition. It has been a great year managing my last two issues of the Jimson Weed. Emily Mullins will continue to carry on our tradition to produce a quality journal. So thank you, Emily, for taking on the mantle. I'm not going to cry. That's gross. In this issue and in tonight's premiere, we want to celebrate spring. As always, we welcome submissions at any time. I thank you for coming out or for logging in. I hope you find this edition of the Jimson Weed enjoyable and memorable. This issue and tonight's presentation are dedicated to our featured poet, Suzanne U. Rhodes, tonight, and writers featured in the past and the future. Writers and contributors all bring luster to the journal now in its 24th year. Please help yourself to a copy of our spring edition. If not here tonight, it is available on campus and at other local venues. You can email me if you have questions about where to get them. As always, we appreciate the enthusiasm of our contributors and our readers. Now, greetings from Dr. Jillian Blong-Tiller, faculty advisor to the Jimson Weed, who arranged this all tonight and is amazing and wonderful and beautiful, and I love her.
I'm very happy to remove my mask. Good evening. Thank you for coming here. For all those people who are out there, by Zoom, by remote, at home, everywhere, having this opportunity to share a wonderful evening with us. Thank you. This is our 40th coffee night. I'm so glad that we can resume coffee night, even though it has to be virtual. It is worth it. As our managing editor, Autumn Stover Bailey, we just heard her, what a wonderful student leader, and Emily Mullins, who's going to step up to be our new Jimson Weed managing editor. Autumn, who led an amazing team to produce her final graduation issue and 3 editions in a row through the pandemic. She deserves highest appreciation. She has blessed UVA Wise to show what a student leader should be, what a creative mind it takes to put a journal together, and what a promising medieval and German scholar in graduate studies in James Madison in the fall. Thanks, Autumn, for all of your contributions. You have set a high bar. And I also appreciate all those here who are attending. Maybe the camera is not on them right now. They are brilliant young people at our UVA Wise. Without them, we won't have our beautiful edition for this spring 2021. May I have a copy somewhere? I hope I can show everyone. Here it is. This is the beautiful issue. We have beautiful issue every time, but this is, again, the very, very beautiful issue. And then you can see this is a cover image from our local artist, and her name is Bonnie Aker, has a long time supporter for our college's journal. So we cannot thank everybody enough for the college, for the community, and for everyone out there. And my students too, they know they have to be here tonight because they can get credit. Oh, just kidding. For the last 20 years of Coffee Night and 24 years of journal history, outstanding student leadership of all of our managing editors, 18 of them by now, and the steps in producing the journal have made each premiere a memorable event. That's a very special to our UVA Wise, that we have this event. We don't only just produce the journal and put it away. We come together and celebrate. Tonight is even more special. There are so many whose inspiration and support make this journal possible that we want to give up appreciation for all when they retire this spring. We especially will thank Robin for archiving the journal, director of our library services. You have heard, or maybe not. He has some discomfort and he was in the hospital yesterday, and we wanted to appreciate him. And then we will send our best thoughts. Robin, I hope you're watching. Hi, Robin. We appreciate you. Jewel, she's over there. And then for funding support. And then we want to appreciate her too. She's a vice chancellor for student affairs. Wonderful. This is a great college. Kathy Still, our publicity person. And Rhonda, oh, we cannot say enough words about our wonderful Rhonda. And then she has been in our department, wonderful friend and a colleague, and assisting us every time when we need her for shipping and helping make copies of our program. Thanks, Rhonda. But the most amazing of all, Coffee Nights, is the luster that our featured writers bring to the event. They deserve all accolades, which make Coffee Night a special evening, not only for the premiere, but also for the inspiration from our featured writers to illuminate the creative path and creative minds. It is our pleasure to have Suzanne Underwood Rhodes back to Coffee Night. At our earliest Coffee Nights is a night of history tonight. With Rita Quillen, it was Rita Quillen in our earliest Coffee Nights and Suzanne who took turns helping grow our Coffee Night, with Rita first coming in the fall of 2000 and Suzanne in the spring of 2001. They both brought their creative writing students to join us. One of them is now our beloved Neva Bryan, Director of Career Discovery and Planning. It's a community all together through Coffee Night and later colleagues and friends. With Suzanne's fifth visit, we now come full circle from spring to spring, 40th Coffee Night and 20 years between them. Even though we have to welcome her back virtually with her new book, Flying Yellow. Here, I can share with you. Okay. With her new book, Flying Yellow, just released by Paraclete Press, signifying a new beginning for all of us. What after Flying Yellow? Radiance. In spring, we are pleased to help celebrate the new collection of poems and to celebrate her standing as a continuing inspiration at our spring Jimson Weed's premiere. This book is available at our bookstore. And thanks, Scott, you help order books all the time. And you just told me that Friday is your last day. A good friend. I think she's watching. Suzanne Rhodes. I don't know why I'm becoming emotional. I think I just love Coffee Night. I like to be with people. So when Scott dropped this farewell note on us, and I say, yes, we all have a passion to pursue our dream. He has a passion to design, to become an artist. And I said, you have come to many times at our coffee nights. Now you are going to leave bookstore as a director of bookstore for your own art shop. He said something about design and then t-shirt. Okay, so that's totally unexpected. I added, just now. So happy new beginning, Scott, if you are watching. Suzanne Rhodes, former adjunct instructor of creative writing at King University and Old Dominion University. It's an emotional line. It's emotional night for me. So many goodbyes. And Old Dominion University, associate editor for the South Year Poetry. Suzanne, you know me, so it's okay, right? Okay. She taught King College in the early 2000s and later Old Dominion University. She was associate editor, or she is associate editor for the South Year Poetry Review and a co-founder of the Appalachian Center for Poets and Writers. Is author of 6 collections of poetry, including Flying Yellow, which she will read some poems from her collections. Hark to these lines, my favorite 2 lines. I quote, "Love can grow so large and no life can hold it." I don't know why I'm turning emotional. Maybe my brother-in-law just passed in mid-March. And these two lines touch me dearly. Love can grow so large and no life can hold it. This is our Suzanne. Flying Yellow is packing with the art of loving and living. Quote from the Bible, for such a time like this, as this, unquote. She will give a public lecture on this topic tomorrow at our convocation hour at 1 o'clock, entitled Flying Yellow, The Poet's Imperative and the Gift of Poetry. Please remember to pre-register, it's virtual. Final credit. In her long career of poetry, she has too many credits to repeat. Rose's poems have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and have won several awards. Her poems and essays appear regularly in journals, books, and anthologies. Formerly a resident fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, she served on the executive committee of the Poetry Society of Virginia. She guest edited the fall 2020 issue of South Year and has been the guest speaker for the Poets Roundtable of Arkansas annual spring celebration this month. Currently, she teaches virtual poetry workshops through the Muse Writers Centers in Norfolk, Virginia. She was one of us for a long time. Rose has conducted numerous workshops on writing and the imagination for teachers and students, and has written a critical guide for student poets. And I love this book. I think she internalized poetry greatly, and I always go back to her book, The Roar on the Other Side. That is the poetry. That is the gift of poet. They roar and they share it. I know, finally, she holds an MFA from the Johns Hopkins University. Besides teaching and writing poetry, she does a freelance writing and editing. She recently moved with her husband, Wayne. We love him too. From Virginia Beach to Fayetteville, Arkansas, to be near their grandson. Her book is always about family. Family always comes first. Please join me in welcoming poet Suzanne Rhodes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Juan Tiller. I was very moved by your introduction and very moved to think of people who are leaving that have been so well loved and have contributed so much to the university. And I want to congratulate all the people who've worked on the Jimson Weed. I'm so impressed. Dr. Juan Tiller sent me a copy of it, and I've had a chance to read some of the poems and look at the artworks, and it's truly impressive. Of course, I've seen the Jimson Weed before, and I've always admired it, and it's a tremendous work of creativity and passion. And thank you so much for inviting me to come here for coffee night. I have many happy memories of bringing students who also had a great time. I'm missing my cup of coffee right now, but that's all right. So I, again, want to thank you all for tuning in. And I'm going to begin by reading, I'll be reading poems from my new book. And the first group of poems are going to be poems of place. Poems, the places that are places in my heart. And we all can relate to places that are part of us, places of loss, places of love, places of fear, and these places shape who we are. The first is a poem that was inspired by a kayaking trip with my husband to Stumpy Lake in Virginia Beach. And it's called "There is the Lake and There is the Street." We left the street for the timeless green lens of water. The only signposts were cypress trees with fluted dresses who danced when our heads were turned, the way trees in love dance everywhere, who led us to longer and farther reaches of silence, past the turtle's head, the egret's curve, our paddles resting across our laps as villages of knobs drifted by on their way to the sun's slow commerce. Past the water strider's elegant script and our need for words, for memory. We held it the whole afternoon, that enchanted face, then let it slip into the water. Well, then we moved, as Dr. Huang Tiller said, from the shores of Virginia Beach to Fayetteville, Arkansas, in Northwest Arkansas, in the Ozark Mountains. And this poem was written after a trip that Wayne and I took to Eureka Springs, which is a very charming Victorian resort community village. And so we ate at a restaurant there, and we were driving home, and it had gotten dark, and the road was a 2-lane, very dark, curvy road. And we came across an unexpected encounter. This poem is called "Out of Place." The dark was darker than back east, steeped in trees and stone, not thin as nights blown off the ocean. This dark swallowed even the road I strained to see. The headlights did what they could to map the unknown, but didn't spot the coyote in time, only his partner in the other lane who made it back to the woods. The car broke where it struck. The creature's remains knocked all the way to the light left on at home. Perhaps you've read The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner and are familiar with the character Quentin, a very neurotic, disturbed character who ended up committing suicide. And in this poem, I refer to Quentin, but he represents a deeply loved and deeply loved person. It's called "Tufts of Him Drift Down." No longer the sandscape where I named the shells and the shorebirds rounding the waves, praised the daily skies unfurling coral sunbursts or gray solemnity, but always a heaven in view. Here the yard is mostly moss, old thyme, old oaks. I had a hunger for stars one night and lay on my back for a glimpse, but the dark was tangled up in branches, and Quentin returned to my thoughts as he has of late at night. There's an hourless space before waking, a womb or urn safe from hope's cruel feathers, an escape from hawkish time that seizes what it likes from the sky and rips apart a future tufts of him drift down. So where does this leave me now? You don't say. Cicadas drown your voice. Or maybe it's my own heart clanging in chains. The stars know. They sing in voices far and pure, unlike time bleeding into morning. If you've never been to Pea Island Wildlife Refuge, it's a pretty awesome place. My husband and I went there a few years ago, and it was a cold, very cold March day, a gray day. And I had so looked forward to getting away and finding some inspiration in the landscape, but it was pretty dreary and the wind was a big bully, and the scenery was unimpressive as we walked along a broad paved pathway. But then a surprise, a gift. This is called gray distances. The loneliness of their long whistles, the sound full of their whiteness. Even in community, they are lonely. Miles of loneliness across the rain-beaten water as they have come to overwinter, to fly the gray distances from there to here, to be the wings of longing, to plumb the sky and sea, landing and leaving like arrows from the bow of God, the air crying for love of swans. And the last poem in this section is called Cutting Hair. And I was going through chemotherapy treatment. On the day to cut your hair, the sun has shaken its shaggy mane of light over the near ocean, over the trees behind our house after a night of hunting, after birds have refilled the trees and death has slipped into the deep woods, its memory scant as a snail's thread on the patio. I wrap you in a cape and snug it with a clip. How careful I must be, rounding your good ear with scissors, the ear my tongue loves to kiss, apricot sweet, and loves too the bad ear and its ghosts. I thread your hair with a comb to gauge length, silver in my loom. I cut your hair in rhythm, remembering the day you shaved what was left of mine, how we walked on a trail through the marsh, through tufts of fog, and I was slow as soup of low tide, slow against your arm, remembering what it was like not to lean, to be bright in my bones. I see light differently now, painting the branches behind our house early before you're awake. It's more the gold of afterlife, I think, a glimpse before bodies take on all that death. And now, because Dr. Huang was so kind to refer to this poem, I'm going to read Shirley's Spaniel. To be a priest is to widen your arms to hold the great sorrow, the stillborn hour, the hour night fell like a drunk along the canal, slipping into the black mouth of oblivion, and you laid your head on your arms to rest forever. But being a priest, you have to wake them up, those arms, and make them take heart for the ache of holding up a world small and trembling, full of fever, or bone thin and silent as snow. Sometimes you hold so long you become the other. Is it so? Is it possible? Shirley's spaniel took on her seizures, but one day missed the step and lost the field. The priest said it happens that love can grow so large no life can hold it. First it seeps, then flows, then floods, and someone walks out and someone disappears. The next poem is about my grandmother. I like writing poems about people. The first section of my book, in fact, is about blood ties, family members. And she died. She was a farmer who lived in rural northern Alabama. And I had many happy visits to the farm there during my childhood, to my grandparents, and even into adulthood. And then, but she died, and my mom and sister, we went to the funeral. And then afterward, we took care of some business matters in her home. And I stepped outside of the house on the day we were to leave, and it was early spring. And I stood there surveying the farm that had meant so much to me. And I breathed the sweet, pure Alabama air. And then I took note of this glorious forsythia bush of hers, and it was just shooting out spears of bright yellow light. And that's the image that I carried home with me, which led to this poem. It's called Nettie. She went out in forsythia, a yellow day bursting over fields once ablaze with corn and cotton, over the road buried in asphalt that leveled it, but it's still breathing underneath, pure dirt, hard as a laborer's back, a road that follows the earth's curve. The tall weeds walk up and down, singing alongside, and I was the girl walking with them, telling stories to the wind. Strange, I wasn't sadder. Grandma's laughter was always wanting out, teased her mouth into a grin, but had to hold itself in for the worrisome times, and she could worry better than anyone in Morgan County. Storms, the boys running moonshine, Aunt Mattie going blind, and my mother, the beauty among brothers with fire in her mind. That morning was the last time I breathed the simple air. There's no one left to pick the small, sweet jewels of time, strawberries from her garden. You may be familiar or have read, if you're a student, you probably read in one of your early American literature classes, Mary Rollinson's Captivity narrative. And I don't have time to give the whole backstory, except to say this was in 1676, and it was during King Philip's War, when the English and the settler and the European settlers and the Wampanoag Indians were battling violently each other. And so her town was raided. She was taken into captivity. Her child was shot as she was carrying it in her arms and died 3 days later. And she and others were forced to march for 11 weeks into cold, freezing conditions with starvation. And she was later ransomed and returned to her husband and other 2 children. And then she wrote this famous captivity narrative that describes her horrific experiences. And she organizes it with her removes, moving from camp to camp. And the framework for the whole thing is the Old Testament account of the Israelites in the wilderness. This is Mary Rollinson's Removes. And a quote from her narrative. When others are sleeping, mine eyes are weeping. In the beginning, she was called often to relate scenes of blood and flame from the 10th of February, with the good wives crying to hear her tell of her dead child turned under barren dirt and left alone on a hill as she was led away, and how she marked with scripture each remove, the camp of snow and fever, the swamp of sinking, the ground where praying Tom dangled white fingers, the begging from fire to fire for any niche against the frozen black void she read as inscrutable love, for her mind forged on Calvin would not bend. Though sometimes in the starved light before day, she would hear the child pleading for water, pleading from just over the ridge, and she would cry out, her wits unlashed as stars withdrew their nets, but her legs failed her, snared by sleep. What mercy, she would later say, to quell her madcap flight and savage fate. This telling of her inmost trial she came to fix in print, could hardly believe it was she herself there in the tent, slabbering over a horse's foot snatched from a child, or swearing in the face of pagan taunts. How is it she secretly craves that state even now as others sleep? A manic flame to burn the ordered words, the syntax that gives shape to every scream. Just 2 more here. I wanted to read one called Kite Surfer, because I have to find the page, I'm sorry. Kite Surfer, because I used to work with veterans who had invisible and visible wounds, suffering from PTSD in particular. And so this is a character. I was at the beach watching a kite surfer in these big blustery winds, and it was pretty magnificent show. And I imagined that he was one suffering from PTSD, as Mary Rollinson did as well. So this is Kite Surfer. What will he do now in bigger wind, bigger than the dragon flame that zapped his friend across the sands, collapsing the world in the millionth war, burnt men shambling in the orange flare? He steers his kite across the sea doing hoochie glides, knowing the lure of muscle, the taunt that corners blind forces, the power of his control bar. He's lost sight of land, lost guilt in his death slide, the wind lofting him high above the graves of the drowned. He rises like memory, canceling itself, freeing itself for the purity of height, his canopy its own small sky to hoist him heavenward, away from his brain that knows and keeps count of every costly flinch. His M16 stalled when his fingers shook like girls. No heartbreak here. The wind is all for now. And last is a poem about my grandson, who's now 8. He was around 2 when he inspired this poem. And I tried to get inside his head as a 2-year-old in his crib, what would his perception be? What would his world be like? And so this is called Royal Mourning for Marcus. The child wakes and reaches into pure day, high-wired to test the lay of the crib to make sure the sheet's firemen are climbing their ladders and the monkey's glass eyes have kept their stare. He tries the wooden bars for strength, shaking them sternly. His legs bounce, happy as frogs, and light spills ever brighter through the split blinds. The ear turns cupward to the fields where rooster and donkey trumpet the hour and a pickup growls through gravel. Oh, glorious day before mother wakes up, and the boy is prince of every prancing cloud. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing the other readers as well.
We are so grateful for Suzanne for reading her poems, and I know we're looking forward to her lecture tomorrow at 1. So in tonight's program, please join me in honoring our retiring Jimson Weed benefactors, Mr. Robin Binky, Director of Library Services, Dr. Jewel Worley, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Kathy Still, Communications Director and Public Spokesperson, Rhonda Bentley, Administrative Assistant of the Department of Language and Literature for 44 years, and finally, Professor Michael O'Donnell of the Department of Language and Literature for 54 years. We'll share with our audience their contributions to the Jimson Weed in a brief video, and we'll show our appreciation with coffee and a memento. And Dr. Tiller will be presenting those after the video. So we would like to thank you for archiving the Jimson Weed and for letting us use the library facility for coffee night events and for helping proof the Jimson Weed Constitution in 2014. And I just have one question for you. Are you still worried about coffee spills in the library?
Of course, I'm always, because I always like to have a neat facility, but not as much as I used to in the other library, because at least you could replace the squares here in the library. But I'm not as worried. I have mellowed over the years. I'm not as strict as I used to be, and I've mellowed with age, I guess. And as you can see, all the issues of the Jimson Weed are here in the archives. And then we have another copy out on the stacks. And so students can check those out. and they can check these out too, but we keep a tighter control, anything in our archives.
Well, thank you very much.
I enjoyed it.
So we're here with Jewel, and we would like to thank her for the support of the Student Activities Fund. And a question for you, Jewel. Has the decision to budget the Jimson Weed publishing costs been a challenging one, considering that many other student activities also need support from the fund?
It has been challenging. However, I believe that funding is essential for the Jimson Weed as it provides an outlet for our students' creative expression. And it also affords experiences that make students more marketable. And it also enhances competitiveness for graduate programs.
Very true. So for Kathy Still, we'd like to thank you for the Jimson Weed publicity through local newspapers and other social media through these many years. And thanks to your publicity, community awareness of the Jimson Weed has grown exponentially. It takes a village and team effort to produce the Jimson Weed. But publicity is the final key to the publication success. So a question for you. Did you often get calls about Jimson Weed deadlines and coffee night, or questions about the speakers after publicity went out to the coal field? Have you ever had to field any strange Jimson Weed coffee night related questions?
Yes, when the news release would go out, I would get plenty of calls. People would want to know where the event would be. They want to know more about the speaker, and that was always fun. And I knew it was getting some publicity at that point. And I've even had some people drop off their submissions to my office for Jimson Weed. And that was always fun because I got to see them in person and talk with them a little bit. And also, one of the strangest questions I've ever had is everyone wanted to eat before they go to coffee night, and they wanted to eat at Chick-fil-A. And so they wanted to know if we had a drive-through. And I had to explain, no, we don't have a drive-through.
So for Rhonda, we thank you for typing manuscripts if not submitted electronically, and for shipping the journals to the contributors if they couldn't get their copies in person, especially heavy lifting through the pandemic year. So a question for you. Was the shipping always smooth? Any memorable mailing issues?
No, there's not any memorable mailing issues. Jillian was always extremely prepared and meticulous with her little notepads with the address on there, and stuck to the number of copies that they were getting and turned this way and that way. So no, they were always perfect. So there were no issues. The only issues we occasionally had was trying to get the front and back copied, getting the copier to cooperate with us. That was all.
For OD, Assistant Professor of French, we thank you for your outstanding service to the college and community for 54 years, and for your contribution to the Jimson Weed from readings to donations. You've been our role model for positive living and thinking and contribution to the college for more than half a century. The revived Jimson Weed is only in the journal's 24th year. It still has 30 years to catch up. So a question for you, OD. What is the key to making such a difference in students' lives over so many generations, from parents to children and their children's children attending this college? And can you give us a few favorite lines of poetry in English or in French?
Well, the answer to the first question, and I've thought about it a lot, you have to be careful because when you answer that question, because almost no matter what you say, it's going to sound self-serving, and you don't want to do that, obviously. My wife comes from Thailand by way of Australia, and her culture, if you say things that brag about yourself, they call you a concrete face. So not wishing to be a concrete face. I think probably the best, I could say, I don't know, but that's not going to sound very good on tape and with your program. So I think what I probably should say is a lot of it has to do with luck. And I mean that sincerely. I came here as a young man, age 25, and this was my first and only job in my whole life. And I'm now halfway through my 54th year. I'll be 79 in December. And so this is it. And remember, teaching gives you 4 months off a year. And so I've traveled the world for the last 60 years. And that kind of determined who I am. When I first came here, I thought I might stay a year or two. And you see what happened. I never applied for the job. I was in graduate school in Indiana, and the academic dean called me up on a Friday afternoon and said, "Come down, we got a job we want you to look at." I said, "Okay." And then I came down and I called him back a week later. I said, "Yeah, I'll give it a shot for a year or two." And then, again, it's 54 years later. So again, I never applied for the job. I came to the job. And the other thing I want to tell you is a number of times, several times over 10 years when I first came here, I got other job offers, government, other teaching jobs, whatever. And the significant thing is they were all for more than twice the money I was making here. And I never moved for money. I stayed here because I like the place. I like the area. I like the people. Love, actually. And so that's it. So I looked into a place that happened to suit me. And if the results are good for students and parents and they want to send their kids, I've had a ton of them. I've never had a kid say, "You had my grandfather." I've been here long enough to do that, but I've never had anybody come up and say that. Parents and children, oh my God, yes, I've got all kinds of those over the years. So that's the first question. You want me to move on to the little bit of poetry?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. A little bit of poetry. And some people, since Jillian suggested I might do it in French, I can, and I will. I guess I would say that some people may recognize this, and I'll adapt it just a little bit. So here's the poetry. In French. Qu'est-ce qu'on demande de toi? C'est que tu pratiques la justice, que tu aimes la miséricorde, et que tu marches humblement dans la vie. That's it. No French. Some people may recognize it. Most people won't. That's okay. Yeah. What else?
That's it. Thank
Okay,
you
thanks
very
very
much. So now we'll move on to the presenting of the plaques. Robin could not be with us here tonight. As Dr. Wong Tiller mentioned, he is in the hospital, hopefully having a smooth recovery, and we send our regards. So first we'll have Dr. Jewel Worley. Dr. Tiller will present the plaque to Jewel. And next we have Kathy Steele, who is not here, question mark. Okay. Next we'll have Rhonda Bentley. Thank you. And lastly, we'll have Professor O.D. O.D. That's your cue. You get more things. Let's give everybody a round of applause.
Okay. In the following, we'd like to recognize our graduating managing, oh my goodness, editor. To express our thanks to you for your outstanding work, we present you a plaque and a copy of Suzanne Rhodes' new book, Flying Yellow. We appreciate your leading role to take the Jimson Weed and the staff team to success, especially producing 3 of your 4 issues by remote over the pandemic. Congratulations, Autumn, on your graduation.
Thank you so much. You just did great work.
We also appreciate Rachel Ward for her outstanding services as arts and graphic editor. Rachel could not be with us tonight, but congratulations, Rachel, on your graduation, and thank you for all of your hard work.
And congratulations to Rach for getting into grad school. We're very proud of her. So now we'll have Professor Michael O'Donnell, and he will begin this evening's program with a reading from his forthcoming book, Joseph Charles Smitty, Papa Joe.
Thank you. And everybody here okay? Everybody here? All right. Thank you. The first thing, and I don't have much time, so you'll forgive me if I go quickly. I do everything quickly, not well, just quickly. It'll be painless and over very shortly. Anyway, the first thing I want to do is thank Jillian for inviting me, and that's with all sincerity. Jillian's a wonderful woman and a dear friend. She and Ken both, and have been from all their time here, thank God, for me and my wife. About 9 years ago, Jillian took me aside up in the hall in Zamer, and she said to me, and she may remember, she said to me, congratulations, you're 70 years old. And she said, you found your voice and you're a writer. And probably one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me. And without Jillian, I couldn't have done that. I didn't know how to go about publishing a book and whatever. And the only reason I wrote one in the first place was because one of my doctor close friends said to me, you've led an exciting life. You need to write a book. And so I did. And the rest is history. The current book is about Mr. Smitty, as was already mentioned. And you people who've had me in class know that I speak about Mr. Smitty pretty much every day in class. He's my hero and my model and a lot of other things to me. We did a lot together. We traveled a lot together and we spent a lot of time together, and he hired me and all that. Anyway, so he's the fourth book. The other three books are as well in the bookstore. I'll mention that. And the only reason I mentioned the books and the advertising for them is because the profits from the book go to a student scholarship fund. I don't ever touch the money. I've never touched the money and don't intend to. So once the publication costs are covered, the money goes to the OD or the other OD scholarship fund, just so you know, okay? And the only place they're sold is in our bookstore. I'd like to read two short pieces from the Mr. Smitty book. The way it happened was last summer, my wife and I couldn't go to Australia because they were shut down for the pandemic. They still are, by the way, for the most part. And I didn't have anything planned for the summer. And so I spent 4 months every day at 6 o'clock in the morning going down to our guest house and looking up the hill at the sunrise and drinking a cup of coffee and writing about Mr. Smitty. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience and a labor of love. Where does the book stand right now? It's finished. It's been finished for a while. It's with Millie Lusk, who's either pre-publication or publication person. Julian put me onto her as well. She's wonderful. It's a wonderful job. I just had an email from her this morning. The final draft is all done. It's ready to go, et cetera, et cetera. So the next thing will be the publisher and the printing, and it should be out probably within a month or two. I'm not sure about that. We don't really have a deadline because of the pandemic, and we hope to have a book signing over in the bottom of Slemp in the fall, just as we did for the other 3 OD books, just to let you know, give you hopefully something to look forward to. And again, they're only sold in our bookstore. The two Mr. Smitty short stories, two little snippets that I want to read. And by the way, I hope you like them. If you don't, that's okay. My wife chose them, so you can blame her if you don't like them. Here's the two stories. Mr. Smitty, as you know, everybody talks about him being a banjo player, and he was, but he was a lot more than that. And I certainly emphasize that in my book. The banjo thing is just one part of the story. And by the way, I used Mr. Smitty's son and close friend of mine, Joe Frank Smitty, Dr. Joe Frank Smitty, retired now, lung surgeon. I used him for some advice and help and direction, that sort of thing. So, and he was very good about that and generous with his time, made some wonderful suggestions, and it gave the book some coherence. Anyway, the two stories that I want to tell you, you might wonder about them. They're both kind of barroom stories. Mr. Smitty and I spent a lot of time in bars in Ireland and other places as well. And when you go to bars, you know you have to go to the bathroom from time to time. And these are both bathroom stories. I know that's a little unusual, but here you go. Two bathroom stories about Mr. Smitty. We were in this pub, and a lot of our stories begin this way. And we needed to go to the restroom. Our Irish host told us how to do it. He said, first door on the right, but once inside, you'll need to go to the far end. It's a ways down, a long ways down. And so we went into the closet. We opened the door and went in. And first on the right, we went into total darkness and found ourselves banging around in buckets and mops in a 3 foot by 3 foot janitor's closet. That's the Irish version of humor and bathrooms. Second bathroom story, also true. All my stories are true. I don't do fiction. Ridiculous, but not fiction. Same situation, different bar, different place. Again, first door on the right, go all the way. This time it was me, and I did it. And to my surprise, I went through the door. I found myself outside in a torrential downpour of rain, facing a blank wall, which apparently doubled as a male restroom. The Irish have a gift. That's the two stories about bathrooms I wanted to share with you. I might have another minute or two. If I could, I'd just like to say a couple words about things I share with my students, and I'd kick myself, and it'll be quick. Just give me a second. What do I tell my students every day? And you people who are here, you know, I tell them to pay attention. I tell them to read. And and John, Adrian, you're going to like this. And John and Ken were two of my greatest friends and supporters here at the college, and I appreciate that. And I want to mention them. Without them, maybe I wouldn't be here. It's a definition of success by Christopher Morley. And you people don't know him, but John and Ken do, and Jillian. One definition of success, period. The only definition is to be able to spend your life your way. And you have to think about that. I like to think about it a lot. I tell my students, I advise my students to treat other people with kindness. If possible, you might even rise to the occasion and care about them. One of my favorite quotes the last couple of years is by Roger Rosenblatt. And it's very simple. He's quoting someone else in a movie, whatever, an old-timey movie. Anyway, the quote is, when something goes wrong, you say, don't blame me. I didn't make the world. I barely live in it. And I often tell my students, I really don't live in this world in many ways, in more than half of all ways. I live in my own world, and my world is a world of good people, decent people, and kindness. It's not a world of spite and vindictiveness and anger and ugliness. And I tell my students that as well. Anyway, that's the humor. The movie was humoresque. Last quote is from Jill Biden, and she was at the time she was the wife of the vice president. It was 2008, and she teaches and taught at Northern Virginia Community College, Nova. And when she was first interviewed by the press, they said, "Will you continue teaching?" My favorite quote about teaching of all time. And Jill Biden never gave it a second thought. She said, "Teaching isn't something I do. Teaching is who I am." And I like to identify with that quote. And my final thought is, people ask you, what are you going to do now that you're stepping aside from full-time teaching? I can tell you, so far I've only had one job offer, and that's as an apprentice on a construction crew run by Big Ed, JD, and Mr. C. Thank you.
Thank you very much, OD. Next, after I sanitize this podium, if I can get the things out, we will have Lauren Mccoy read her poems. She is an English major here at UVA Wise, very brilliant, very amazing.
Thank you, Autumn. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Breakfast. I keep finding your teeth marks on my heart. How does I love you taste? Does it taste like home, like a yellow forever, like a red sun, like pancakes in bed and sex in the kitchen? Is it good enough to make you stay? And then the next poem I'm going to read is called Me to Myself. You have hands that write about love and lavender fields, hands that hold other ones, clammy as they are. Fingers that flip and file through the pages of the First Baptist Church 5th edition cookbook. Arms that have climbed up catawba trees and out the windows of your bedroom. You have legs that have won you races against your brother, feet that have walked you through the creek and the journey flip-flopless back home. Toes that have stretched just far enough to kiss him in the shower. Ears that know how Sunday sounds from the August wind that whispers its way through your grandmother's house. You have a chest that your timid heart calls home, even though it takes up residence on your sleeve. Shoulders that are burdened with baggage, but somehow manage to carry backpacks full of 50-cent fish and lures. A dimpled chin that never fails to catch coffee spilling down, chapped lips that can't keep secrets but hide a crooked smile, cheeks that are painted with freckles and win lunch table contests for how many grapes they can hold. You have eyes that must see the sun every time she sets, eyes that cry often enough to water all the half-priced hyacinths you bought at the home and hardware store. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Those were lovely. Next, we're going to have Michael Samardak, an adjunct professor of history here, an area writer, and a lay worship leader at Christ Lutheran Church in Wise.
Okay, my essay is entitled Chuck Jones, Rex Ridiculum Cartoonus. Once you see the cartoon about the singing and dancing frog, you never forget it. The story about a guy who finds a magical frog and dreams of getting rich off the frog's talent, only to end up in an insane asylum before dumping the frog so some future jerk can have his life ruined by the amazing little creature, tells its story without any dialogue. Instead, facial expression tell the tale. We see when the guy is greedy or desperate and when other people think he has flipped his lid. It's all told by the raising and lowering of eyebrows and the furrowing of foreheads. The cartoon is One Froggy Evening. It was directed by Chuck Jones. You may not know the name of Chuck Jones, but his work is very well known. Charles M. Jones was born in 1912. When he was a boy, his family moved to Los Angeles. Young Chuck displayed a flair for art, and after high school, he took some art school classes and drifted into animation. In 1933, he was hired by the Leon Schlesinger Studio, which made the Looney Tunes and Merry Melody cartoons for Warner Brothers. In 1938, Schlesinger promoted Jones to the rank of director. Schlesinger saw something in this young man that his peers did not. Jones only directed Merry Melodies, color cartoons, the top-of-the-line product, and attempted to imitate the style of Disney cartoons, but without much success. In his first years as director, Chuck Jones made cartoons about shy characters beleaguered by their surroundings, such as an adorable mouse named Sniffles and the hapless Inky, who found his life utterly upended in each cartoon by a silent mynah bird. These cartoons were not exactly funny, but they were unforgettable. Perhaps the low point of Jones's early phase came in 1939. Warner Brothers wanted to make a cartoon that celebrated American history. Chuck Jones got the assignment because, in the view of his peers, he had no sense of humor, and so could make the patriotic Old Glory, in which Uncle Sam teaches Porky Pig the importance of American history, with no chance that Jones might subvert the cartoon with jokes. The breakthrough year for Chuck Jones was 1942. Suddenly, his sense of humor blazed forth, particularly in The Dover Boys, which spoofed turn-of-the-century melodrama and its story of how three drippy college students saved Sweet Dora Standpipe from the evil clutches of Dan Backslide, coward bully, cad, and thief. None of the characters move in a remotely lifelike way as they leap from one extreme pose to the next, all the while spouting ludicrous dialogue. After The Dover Boys came out, no one doubted that Chuck Jones had a sense of humor. At the end of 1942, Jones showed that he had figured out Bugs Bunny, the rising cartoon star of the Looney Tunes. Bugs, in Jones's view, worked best when he began the cartoon minding his own business, only to be offended by the hunter Elmer Fudd, or an oily stage magician, or an officious floor walker. Once offended or imperiled, Bugs could then say, "Of course you know, this means war," and then unleash all sorts of comic mayhem for the next 7 minutes. To Chuck Jones, cartoons were not about the gags. The gags had to arise from character, and each character had to have a well-defined trait that in Jones's hands almost became a mathematical axiom. Bugs Bunny must always be provoked into action. Daffy Duck must always believe he is a great hero. The Roadrunner must never attack the coyote. In the course of his decades-long career, Chuck Jones won an Academy Award for The Dot and the Line, a cartoon that he made for MGM in 1965. Subtitled A Romance in Higher Mathematics, the cartoon tells the story of a line who is in love with a dot. But the dot thinks that the line is too stiff and uninteresting and runs off with a squiggle. However, the line learns to bend and ultimately creates beautiful art. The dot recognizes that the squiggle is too undisciplined to be truly creative and reciprocates the line's love. In some ways, the dot and the line could be Chuck Jones' vision of his own career. Originally dismissed as humorless, by applying discipline to his zany characters, determining what Bugs Bunny could never do and what Daffy Duck and Wile E. Coyote must do, Jones made films that delighted generations of viewers. His name might not be remembered by the public, but the characters he worked on and shaped are easily recognizable and enjoyed to the present day. Perhaps Chuck Jones's career can be a source of inspiration as well as laughter. Thanks to perseverance and discipline, the Looney Tunes director, who was once viewed as lacking a sense of humor, ended up making some of the funniest cartoons of the 20th century. Surprise of us, surprise of us.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now we will hear from Emily Mullins, new managing editor and an English senior at UVA Wise, and also many other majors, history and philosophy minor. accomplished.
Okay, guys, this is called Being Alive. For years, I tried to live in the past, full of regret, anger, confusion. I desired change. I wished for the cards to fall differently. I wanted to leave me. The past haunted me. It was too much. This is depression. I then tried to live in the future, fast-paced, always running, always thinking. More, more, more. I wasn't doing enough. I'm not where I should be. Life is moving too fast and I cannot keep up. This is anxiety. My mind is a battleground. Live in the past, let it consume you. Get over it, move on, there's much to do. A constant power struggle, a desire to be on the front line. This is stuck. I tried depression, I tried anxiety, I tried stuck. Nowhere, I've gone nowhere within these friends. It's time to let them go. It's time to say hello to here, right now. This is being alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Now we'll hear from Olivia Strath, an art major from Emory and Henry College.
I'm surprised I got my mask off without ripping off my earrings. Oh well. Now that I'm up here, you're all going to regret it. I would like to preface this with this is based off of a true story, but it is slightly embellished, as you will discover. I just need to find it. I'll tell you it's on page 26 in case you want to avoid it in the future. Dear friends, one fine afternoon of my childhood shall always mark my image for the rest of my life. I have been afflicted with a permanent scar, a sobering reminder of the cruel reality of life. The day was pleasant and began like any other my teenage self would have participated in. I awoke at noon as a result of my mental health and remained in bed for another 20 minutes before attending to my preparatory duties. Since the sun was shining on that fine spring morning, I felt alive enough to not only brush my hair, but to treat it with healthy oils. I donned a fine band t-shirt, you wouldn't know I'm there underground, and a pair of comfortable trousers. I shall admit to admiring myself in the mirror for far too long, but not long enough to distract myself from the ever important mission to locate delicious lunches. I had come into a large sum of money a few years ago by less than fortunate means, but thanks to the generosity of my late father, I was able to grab a few dollars to find myself an artisanal sandwich from one of my choice of shops. This was my task. Upon a rather casual pair of shoes, say goodbye to my darling cat Yvonne, say goodbye to my friend James, and you speaking to my remaining dad, and headed out into some of the most lovely temperatures I had encountered that year, and I didn't mind how the sidewalk hadn't been repaired yet. I didn't mind the occasional insect buzzing in my ear, lured by the sweet scent and investigating for pollen. Acquaintances recognized me and offered small waves or acknowledging nods, to which I responded with a return gesture or a cheery hello. My family lived exceptionally close to the shopping district of our city, so a brisk walk would lead me safely into familiar territory in a few measly minutes. Chain coffee shops and locally owned cafes lined the streets, and patrons sat under the shady awnings with ice drinks. A florist was out watering her impressive display of plants, and I considered picking up a succulent at some point. The odds and ends store is my favorite place to loiter in, being cramped and dusty, like the shops and movies where young protagonists would seek refuge from bullies. I was always sure to purchase a small knick-knack and chat up the bored yet friendly clerks, an elderly couple who would take turns at the counter. Friendly conversation, however, would have to wait until after a meal and a lemonade. With the deli in sight, I glanced up at the noisy construction lot and pondered what it could possibly turn into. Then I was struck, quite literally. In my sudden mental absence and in the haze of sound, I had failed to notice a clunky vehicle illegally running the red light, holding back traffic for crossing pedestrians such as myself. People scattered like dust in the wind, but I was not so swift and certainly not as lightweight. Someone attempted to drag me by my shirt collar, but I was too much for this would-be hero, and I only succeeded into collapsing into harm's way once again. I rolled onto my back just in time to witness a witnessed this vehicle, which I noticed had a fading "How's my driving" sticker on the side, roll a worn tire over my right kneecap. In that moment, as many individuals would report in similar situations, time appeared to flow in slow motion. I saw my knee flatten before I heard the dull crunch, and the pain simply did not set in. I squinted up to view the face of the assailant and realized how remarkably ancient this fellow was. His hair is nearly white, and his knuckles were gnarled and crackly, and he gripped the steering wheel in a too late realization of what he had done. I was shocked. How could someone such as him even be allowed to drive? I thought. How would someone such as him be allowed to drive? Surely he's an escaped a home for the elderly, or he's fled from a home caretaker, or maybe he's an escaped convict. I had enough slow motion time to then consider the rates of elder abuse in such situations, and it was enough to almost forgive him. At the same moment, he came to a slow stop on top of my poor leg. With this, my perception of chronological motion resumed at full speed once again. "Pardon me, sir. You appear to have run over me. Would you please pull forward and get off of my kneecap?" I shouted politely, the pain not yet set in due to the physical shock. The gentleman in the vehicle did not bother looking out and down to notice my pinned body. Witnesses of this event yield similar cautions of the nowhere near kindly. He searched around, taking note of the motion of the people, willing to attempt to help me. A lad around my age knelt down beside me to have a go at pushing the car away, but he failed. I gave him a thumbs up for trying, as anyone should. At last, the elderly man spoke in a loud voice. "What's that?" He repeated this a few times, and my newfound crowd relayed the situation again and again to no avail. I began to grow slightly frustrated at the amount of failure going around. But I calmed myself down by remembering that everyone has an off day here and there. "Should I keep going?" he asked, and a kind lady nodded. She told him, quite carefully, to go in reverse. This was the moment we all realized he was, in fact, nearly deaf. The man did the exact opposite to her instructions, pulling the back tire forward and running over my leg a second time with an even more awful cracking cacophony. The pain was promptly coupled with the pain from earlier, and that particular brand of hell on earth was amicably met with the front tires grazing my left leg's calf as I jerked it out of the way before any more harm could befall me. This man was gone, and I could only hope someone documented his license plate. I writhed in agony, hissing and gasping at the pain, and people began to kneel down and tend to me. The gentle lady from earlier pulled up my pants leg to examine, and I heard the noise of someone gagging. I was not crippled in both legs, but my right knee was a finely ground mush comparable to a carton of orange juice with pulp, except it was red. Thematically, alternatively, my leg resembled a hearty, chunky beef in potato stew and tomato juice. One of the last conscious thoughts I had was how I wouldn't be able to have my occasional sandwich after all, and even if I could, I'd pass on the tomato. The rest of the incident hazed out, but I remember the sleek form of a taxi service that appeared in place of an ambulance. Looking back, I'm not sure if this was a display of monetary consideration or an insult due to my minuscule lunch money and comfortably messy shirt. Regardless, I was well acquainted with the nearby hospital staff, and the nurses almost seemed amused to hear my story. At least, compared to my previous visits, when I was in framed photographs where often I'd stay and vomit blood. As a famous and familiar face, I was treated quickly, promptly, and invasively before being sent on my way a hefty time later. Despite my hardships, I was eager to cook something at home because hospital food was certainly not the meal prep I had in mind. That's right, you're not getting rid of me yet. I have to wipe this down. Perfect.
Thank you, Olivia, for that incredibly insane story. We appreciate that very much. Next, I'd like to bring up Ethan Samardak, an English graduate from UVA Wise.
Thank you. My submission is an essay called Go, Go, Godzilla. I don't remember when exactly I first discovered Godzilla. Just when I was a little kid, maybe about 6 or 7, when I first learned of the giant, spiny-backed dinosaur beast prone to smashing Tokyo and battling other giant monsters. I have a pretty good memory of my first Godzilla movie, though. I'm quite certain it was a film from the 1960s, Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, though I've since learned its original Japanese title is along the lines of Giant Monster War. In that movie, astronauts to Planet X discover an alien society under threat from King Ghidorah, a golden alien dragon with 3 heads. The aliens wish to transport Godzilla and the pterosaur-like monster Rodan from Earth to their world and use them to defeat Ghidorah. Initially, all seems well, as the UFO carried Godzilla and Rodan do their job admirably. But of course, as is so often the case in these movies, the aliens prove to be evil themselves and set the mind-controlled giant monsters loose on Earth to conquer it. Quick-thinking heroes are able to shut off the mind control, and the freed Godzilla and Rodan give Ghidorah another thrashing, sending the dragon fleeing. The aliens are destroyed, and all is well. Roll credits. All in all, Monster Zero probably serves as the archetypal example of the classic Godzilla movie. Inoffensive to kids, corny, especially for an iconic moment where Godzilla jumps up and down in an apparent victory dance after driving Ghidorah away the first time, with the big guy serving as both ally and enemy to the people of Earth, though his ultimate role in the story is as a heroic character. My first real clue that there was more to Godzilla than just goofy monster brawling and ridiculous dialogue may have been when I was around 10 or so. The Godzilla 2000 VHS tape I had came with a bonus feature collecting trailers for various other giant monster movies, most of them in the same silly tradition. One of them, Godzilla's Revenge, is infamously reviled by critics and fans alike for its ridiculousness, as a matter of fact. But the very last trailer in the set was for the original black and white film, King of the Monsters, in its American dub. I was surprised, but also curious, by the more serious tone, and asked my father about it. He told me it was a serious movie and that I could not watch it yet. That was a surprise to me at the time, but I put it out of my head later and moved on. In October of 2018, I finally watched the original Godzilla. Gojira, as it is known in the original Japanese, is most definitely not a children's movie. It is dark and suspenseful, a powerful allegory about the devastation caused by World War II. Godzilla himself is both monstrous and tragic. His body marked with radiation burns from the atomic bomb, this monster is as much a victim of the bomb as the city he destroys. The centerfold of the movie, Godzilla's destruction of Tokyo, is portrayed with the seriousness of watching an actual natural disaster or bombing. The aftermath of this rampage is even worse, as we, the viewer, are shown a hospital full to overflowing with victims. It's an utterly heartbreaking scene, and one that I still think about 3 years later. When the movie concludes with Godzilla's destruction, the tone is not jubilant, but melancholy and full of worry for the future. The original Godzilla is a masterfully directed movie and one that has definitely earned its accolades from fans and critics alike. It holds a special place on my shelf, and I have no issue with people who hold it up as the best of the lot compared to its fellows. But at the same time, I will still always hold an affection for the subsequent movies in the series, especially the goofier ones from the 60s and early 70s. Yes, they're cheesy, and the effects can be laughable. And the plots are often paper thin and repetitive. You can count on both hands how many times evil aliens try to take over the world of giant monsters. But all the same, they kept the memory of the character alive. They probably helped introduce a few generations to Godzilla, not just me. They have their place. After all, so many of the dark and serious giant monsters that have come out in subsequent decades still define themselves against those old wacky movies too. Movies like the serious and grim 2014 Godzilla, or its Japanese counterpart from 2017, Godzilla Resurgence, which itself makes 2014 look tame, would more than likely not exist without the cheesy movies of old to have made the title character an icon. To my view, there is just as much a place for an absurd version of the character as there is a serious version. To deny other presentations and insist only on a single specific vision seems like a pretty reductive viewpoint to hold. The original Gojira itself, as serious and tragic a story as it is, does not present a simplistic account at all. The title monster is both villain and victim in that story. One watches that movie and can feel sorry for Godzilla, even as they also feel sorry for the people caught in his rampage. If that acclaimed movie can present its most famous character as both pitiful and ferocious, can we not also accept, time and again, other movies that present the big guy in other ways too? It has been over 60 years since that original movie. Come what may, whether we see further dark and serious movies of the King of the Monsters, or a new appreciation of the lighter, more absurd movies from his days as protector of Earth, I still remain an appreciative watcher of Godzilla or Gojira in whatever form he might take next. All hail the king, and long may he reign.
Thank you. Let's see. Thank you, Ethan, for that. Next, we're going to bring up Autumn Stover, the current managing editor, my very best friend, and the most beautiful woman in the whole wide world. Congratulations on JMU next year. They're lucky to have you.
Don't make me cry like that. I think that this is my 8th coffee night that I've participated in, and I remember reading a poem for my first one, and I thought that I would either vomit or pass away, or maybe both. So I've come quite a long way, and I'm very thankful for Jimson Weed and Dr. Wong Tiller and Dr. Tiller for everything they've done. The first poem I'm going to read is on page 52. It is Romeo y Julieta. Sage green and hazel wonderings, his eyes that watch me dance in the kitchen, around the smell of dark roast brewing, a year of flower picking, Queen Anne's lace, between the weight of us, fairy rings and bare feet in dew yards, dry air inhaled through bitter cigars, the deep red wine kiss of his lips. I whisper his name like a prayer that never knew contentment before. And the next is on 53. Chevalier. Wood chips fresh like summers in Amish country when children in starched stiff bonnets ran circles around my legs and called me English. A bird carved from nothing and me carved into him. I never could fathom the renaissance of sculpting. He carves a legacy on iron bars, jailbreaking the lost, and he was a chevalier once, I think, with prowess and shoes made for dancing and another life, his soft and sad, plunging depths like silver volcanic ash. I imagine his singing sounds more like grumbling, deep breaths, lonely axes, chopped wood, with groanings for a fire somewhere on the outside. I was never ready to lose it. And now we will have Dr. John Mark Adrian to close coffee night, and I look forward to his closing remarks every coffee night. Please remember that Suzanne does have a lecture at 1 tomorrow. It will be on Zoom, so you can pre-register. That will be in your email for students and faculty. Have a good evening, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, best friend.
I will cry.
All right, so in the early days, we had to use coffee and refreshments as an inducement to get people to come to this event. That's why they named it Coffee Night. They didn't even have the word poetry in the title. Poetry was just something we slipped in over the course of the evening when people weren't looking. Back in those days, poetry apparently wasn't strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet or 5 feet if you're into pentameter. But now that isn't the case. We aren't even providing caffeine and sugar, and yet you're still here. We have a robust crowd both here and online. This, I think, is a good sign for the future of poetry. Now that we have proven that poetry can stand on its own, though, I do think it's important that we go back to having coffee and the really good M&M cookies next year. Okay, my job is not actually to make future suggestions about coffee night. It's to close the program. So I'll do that. First off, I want to express our gratitude to our featured speaker, Suzanne Rhodes. Thank you so much for being with us. I love how so many of your poems evoke and respond to different landscapes, ranging from Stumpy Lake to Pea Island to the Ozarks to the 2-year-old's crib. I also want to add my congratulations to our, I guess, featured retirees, Robin, Jewel, Kathy, Rhonda, and OD. Between the 5 of them, I think they have something like over 200 years of collective service to the college, which is pretty amazing. And they haven't just been passively tallying up the years, right? They've been making a huge impact on the college in so many ways, including for each of you in your own special way, the Jimson Weed, which was sort of highlighted in the videos. So thank you to all you guys as well. Thanks to the presenters tonight, OD, Lauren, Mike, Emily, Ethan, Olivia, and Autumn. I think that's everybody. A relatively small group of presenters, but displaying admirable variety. To wit, we had life lessons, bathroom stories, cartoon royalty, grape stuffed cheeks, pulverized kneecaps, allegorical Godzillas, and Romeo and Juliet, but without the bad ending. Also, thanks to Rosa and her team for providing the technology and logistics and blocking so that we could broadcast to everyone who couldn't be here in person tonight. Finally, Jillian, Autumn, and Emily and the entire dedicated staff of the Jimson Weed. To me, it's so impressive that the Jimson Weed hasn't missed a beat during the pandemic. The Jimson Weed already comes out with an issue every semester. Most colleges, it's 1 issue per year. But to continue that output during this year is nothing short of amazing. It would have been so easy to say, it's the pandemic, we're going to dial it back a little bit. We're going to take the semester off. It would have been understandable, but these guys are committed to the journal. And also, I think, understand that it's times like this when we really do need creative expression, right? More than ever, we need to connect with the larger community of writers and draw inspiration. Just flipping through this issue of the Jimson Weed, I think a lot of the poems in this issue speak to that with particular resonance. Thinking of Emily's poem, being alive, right? What a good title. Good approach to the pandemic, as well as life in general. So congratulations to everyone who had anything to do with this Jimson Weed issue. And thank you everyone else for joining us tonight. Have a good evening.